Hey guys, this is John. Welcome to round 3 of the Lone Wolf League on Chess, season 37. This is my first time participating in the league, but I'm getting the hang of it. I'm seeing how it operates. It's actually pretty easy. You get the feel for it after a week or two. So I am on 2 out of 2 in this 11 round season. Still very early in the tournament. There are, let's see, 18 players who are on 2 out of 2 still. And then we get into the 1.5s. So the scores are narrowing. They're separating a bit, as happens as the tournament goes along. This week, I'm playing this player, Banana Monkey 20. They're also on 2 out of 2. They're rated 2217 classical on Chess. And I hope you guys will enjoy this video. Once again, thanks so much for the feedback on the first 2 rounds. Lots more chess to come in this series. So yeah, enjoy. Let me know what you think as well. And you can consider joining the league too, by the way, if you haven't already and you're interested in playing. You can still late join and register, I believe. So do check it out, the Lone Wolf League and also the 45 plus 45 League. All right, I'll say no more. Let's get into it. Roll the tape. Okay, you guys know the drill here already in game 3 of this 11-week series, Lone Wolf League. I'm excited. I got to admit, the anticipation for each of these games is building every week. So you guys know the drill. I'm trying not to overdo it on my prep. Once again, there's 30 minutes before the game. We're playing the game at 5 o'clock p.m. local time for me. I think my opponent, yeah, it looks like he's in Brazil. So he's probably 1 hour ahead of me. I think I saw that in the pairings or when we were making the pairing, finding a good time to play. So this is my opponent, Banana Monkey 20. His name is Nicholas, it looks like. FIDE rating of 1900. So interesting, he lists all that in his profile. Just as a kind of OPSEC thing, if you're playing over the board tournaments, I would recommend not listing your name, your rating, identifying information, if you're at all worried about people preparing for you. Okay, so some people don't have a care about that in the world. That's fine. Maybe they play online or they play over the board, but they're not too concerned about people looking at their games. But it does make people a lot easier to search if you were to prepare for them in especially a very serious competition over the board. Okay, so let's look at my opponent's games. Not so many games, actually. 243 on Nicholas's Chess profile. Let's start by looking at the league games he's played so far. I think I saw he won his first game by forfeit. So perhaps there was a miscommunication with the opponent about the time, or the opponent just more than likely didn't show up at the specified time. Let's look at his last game. Yeah, a week ago. So I have the white pieces, but as you guys know, if you've seen the first couple of games in this series, I do like to just generally get to know a player's style and see what they play with the other color. So this is an E4 player, at least in this game. Played open Sicilian, quickly got a winning position with bishop b6, knight c7. Okay, so that was his last opponent. This player, Sphinx. Plays some bullet. Okay, it's a Caro-Kann. Bullet I usually discount or heavily discount when I'm looking at a player's preparation. Another E4 game. Okay, I don't believe this was in the league, although maybe it was. Maybe Banana Monkey got the win, but they ended up playing the game anyways, just for fun. At any rate, Banana Monkey was white. Scandinavian with knight f6. And this isn't so theoretically critical, I believe. White playing knight takes d5 here, especially knight c3 on the prior move when black doesn't play queen takes d5. So that just gives me some initial inkling that maybe this player isn't so inclined to theory. Interesting move here. Bishop e2, queen takes g2, bishop f3, I guess, is the idea. Engine doesn't like it for some reason. Why is that? Here, take... you have bishop e4 at the end. Interesting. So attack the bishop, hit the rook. And I guess if takes, takes. And it likes everything that black has going here. If f3, there's queen g2. Okay, I was just curious about that. But let's not waste valuable prep time. Caro-Kann. All right, so Definitely likes the solid stuff. Yeah, so I'm most likely going to play d4 or knight f3 on move 1. You did see me play an English type position against Terror MT in round 1. I'm not opposed to going for something like that again. So here's an e4, e5 game. Banana Monkey was white. Oh, so I said maybe he wasn't inclined to theory, maybe a quiet player. But actually in this game, he played a very sharp gambit, the Belgrade Gambit. Interesting. All right, all right. And what about this one? This game against Siciliana Classica. This might be getting closer to what we can actually use in the game. So Banana Monkey was black. Yeah, I often play this move order myself. Keep the D pawn back for a little bit. Nice and flexible. Plays e6. Ooh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So this variation, I think, is kind of fun for white. In fact, I'm looking at the time management here, too. This is a pawn sack line for white. Banana Monkey playing quickly, though. And they actually repeated and made a very rapid draw. Uh-huh. Yeah, I wouldn't mind playing something like this, but maybe I could play this differently. I played knight c3 here before. Knight e4, bishop d2. Let's just see what he does against that. So we can use the Lichess database. I've mentioned this feature to you guys. So got Banana Monkey 20 as black. Let's see if we can find any games. Not that many games for him in the database. But there is one. There's one game where he played d5 in this position. Okay, so yeah, knight c3, white eventually trying to prepare e4 or perhaps d5 if allowed. So it stands to reason black wants to interfere with those ideas. Knight e4 is popular. I've had some games with bishop d2 here, and I think white's a little bit better. Comfortable position. But in this one, he played d5. White played b3, which looks a little limp. Not a blunder or anything, but normally I would think takes. Yeah, I wouldn't mind playing something like this. Bishop f4. I generally like these positions where you can give black the doubled pawns, or the hanging pawns, I should say. Hit the bishop. Yeah, stuff like this. This is pleasant. Black can easily experience problems in a setup like this. In fact, I think I've seen this exact position before in a book or something. But what if he takes with the knight? This I'm not so familiar with. Maybe we'll consult the master's database. Looks like there's some games. Knight takes d5. Bishop takes. Queen c2. That makes sense. And then f5 is one of the top moves. Knight d7 looks more human. What about knight c6? Knight c6, e4. Knight b4, make room for the bishop. Queen b1, defend. Getting like Catalan vibes here. Bishop b7, a3. Yeah, I wouldn't mind something like this. This looks pleasant. Only one pair of minor pieces have been traded, but yeah, I would 100% play this. Okay. So that's in the case that black plays d5. We capture on d5 and black takes with the knight because they might want to trade pieces. And there's many moves here. Queen c2, rook e1, knight e5. Taking looks, yeah, straightforward and good. Black can't take with a queen. I think they would lose the game right away if they did that. So pawn takes or bishop takes. Pawn takes, probably this bishop f4 move again. It's a quarter pawn advantage for white, but a nice position. There's a lot of ways you can work this position. And most importantly, I don't think in such a position I'm going to be burning globs of time. I just played a pretty bad blitz session the other day, which I posted on my channel in the Climbing the Rating Ladder series. I'm not interested in getting in time pressure in this game, in this 30 plus 30 game. So a simpler type of position with a predictable plan, a setup I played before, that's always appealing, but to me, it's especially appealing today. Look at this bishop takes d5 move again. Queen c2. I do like the look of this. I think I can play such a position on site. Position like this. I don't think I need too much prep to play this passably well. So even if black is playing relatively fast, I'm cool with that. I just like how this looks. White's achieved the 2 pawns in the center. Black's back on the second ranks. Black's solid, no doubt, but white should be better. White should be better. d5. Takes. Oh, try to cramp them with this pawn, huh? Probably if knight f6, knight e5, and you land the knight on c6. Okay. Yeah, I'm seeing stuff we can work with. So now let's see if this is a trend. If Banana Monkey actually goes into these, this is like a Queen's Indian defense by transposition, where Black Fianchetto's the light square bishop. So let's look at his broader repertoire. Banana Monkey as, oh, did I have that as white or black? I think I actually had that looking at him from the white side. Hold up. Let's go to this position. All set. Because I see the color switching around. No, that was a game where he was playing black. From 11 months ago. Okay. That was weird because it switched from black to white on my toggle when I looked at this. So I talked about how as a content creator, it's a nightmare when you record a really long video. You think you're recording and then you go back and you actually fail to press play. So this would be the preparation equivalent of that, preparing for the wrong color. Yeah, but Banana Monkey was playing black in this one game in the database. So just scrolling back here, how many games does he have? Knight f3, usually plays knight f6. One time played c6. That was a bullet game, though. So usually plays knight f6. Let's see, c4. Yeah, e6, 2 games. c6, 1 game. That's from last year. Did he go for a Slav? Yes, went for a semi-Slav. Kind of an unusual semi-Slav with bishop b4. Oh, yeah, I wouldn't mind playing this, too. I often do play exchange Slav, though. So I'd have to weigh if Black went for this and played it confidently, if I'd actually want to go for an exchange Slav. I have a feeling I might mix it up a little bit and play something a bit more mainline, just based on how Black is handling this. But another game where you look at the time management, I haven't really seen this before. The semi-Slav with bishop b4, but he played it relatively quickly. It's not like he was burning time doing that. So maybe he's preparing some curveballs himself against some of these players. This could very well have been in the Lone Wolf League, the 30+30 game. Okay, so it seems like he is capable of playing some unusual stuff and playing it quickly. Okay, so what about this e6 move? No games found. I wonder if the... Yeah, I think the Lichess database is malfunctioning a little bit. At least it's switching back and forth for me. So e6, yeah, g3. And he always plays b6 here. That's interesting to me. So it doesn't look like he plays d5 because for my repertoire, I would be less thrilled about facing d5 in this position because the best that white really has is to go for a Catalan. I can play that, but I don't know the theory super well. It doesn't look like Banana Monkey gets into these positions, though. So maybe if we got this, both sides would be on their own. Both sides could be making it up. What if white plays knight c3? Because that's more along the lines of what I actually do. No instances where he faced knight c3. Another thing I want to check. So let's say I start with d4. He probably plays knight f6. Ooh, plays d5 a lot. Not a great record, but who knows? I mean, this just could be a bad run. Could be a mix of the time controls. Okay, so he does play d5. Also plays Queen's Gambit Decline. Uh-huh. Oh, plays Tarrasch. Plays Tarrasch. Okay. And doesn't have a good record in it at all. Yeah, that being said, I mean, Tarrasch is... Oh, but look at this. He was playing against this against Robespierre. One opponent, bunch of different games. Is that right? All these games go differently? Probably just training. Yeah, just playing someone in a training position. Okay, interesting. So I think I can probably discount that. That might have been a one-off thing. Playing against someone, you can see the ratings. That's why the score was so lopsided. Training with someone, sparring with someone where the ratings were mismatched. So I'm going to guess that the Tarrasch is not part of his main repertoire, even though it's showing up in the Lichess database. So if knight f6, let's say c4, e6. So what if I play knight f3 in this position? Because I'm not sure I really want to face the Nimzo. I don't have much up my sleeve against the Nimzo at the moment. So if knight f3, yeah. So he doesn't seem to play d5 in these positions. So maybe this is the better move order for me. Just d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3. And if he plays d5, so be it. Played c5 in one game. That was against that Robespierre player. So I think b6 is probably the expectation. And now here, if I want to get back into that other variation, I can play this g3 move. Bishop b7, bishop g2. And now on bishop e7 castles, we're probably going to pick up his games. Yeah, there's that game against Siciliana Classica and also Ghost. How did this game against Siciliana go? That's the one where white played d5. Okay, and they blitzed all this out. This is theoretical stuff. White uses the pin against the bishop on b7. If I had more time, maybe I would look into this, but I have limited experience with this particular line. What do the masters say? No games found. And this looks fun, but it would also be demanding. White sacrificing a pawn. I've said that I don't want to have to think a whole lot out of the opening. Top move is here. Here's h4. Go figure. That's modern chess. And maybe Banana Monkey has looked at this too. So I'm thinking about sticking with this variation with knight c3. There's a lot of games in the database with that. I played this before. I'm comfortable with it. If he follows what he typically does, now he usually plays d5. Okay, so I said earlier, he doesn't typically put a pawn on d5, it seems. But maybe once he's developed, got into his Queen's Indian defense setup, maybe then he's more likely to do that. And if knight e4, I think I'll play this bishop d2 move, which I've played before and I'm comfortable with. You try to work up to d5. Yeah, f5, you can play d5. You don't mind losing the bishop pair. White often gets something going in the center with that. Yeah, e4. Lots and lots of games in this. It's a fight. White has the space advantage. Black has the bishop pair. Black has to be patient. But this is a position I can get to quickly and hopefully use my experience advantage. Cause some problems. So I'm cool with that. So yeah, if he sticks with what he typically does, d5, there's also knight a6. Knight a6, knight e5 is a move. Interesting. It's been played before too. Bishop takes g2. When I'm preparing for these league games, you can see I'm heavily dependent on the League Chess database and also the engine. With more time, I might consult books, courses, analysis that I could find of these positions from top theoreticians or top players. But we're going with more of the bare bones stuff, the database and the engine. I guess the whole point of this is to try to get in e4, expand, and then you pull the knight back to d3. Okay, well, that's good to know at least, just in case we have some permutation of that. So this is all out of this knight c3 stuff. So knight e4, bishop d2, f5, bishop f6. I think on bishop f6, I want to go rook c1. It's my recollection. Yeah, c5, d5. Get these Benoni type positions. Yeah, this looks familiar. Bishop e7, f4, start gaining space. Bishop e5, queen d2 or f4. You work up to this basically. Playing f4. Yeah, it's very consistent, isn't it? White often expands. g4. Just kind of clicking through here. What I might expect. Got to watch black playing b5 at some point. White often gets a space advantage in this line, but black tries to slowly break out with that bishop pair. Bide their time, wait for the right moment. Could play d6. I think in this case, too, you do play d5. Yeah, again, it's all working up to this d5 move. And the point is, once a trade happens on c3, white is sufficiently defending the d5 point. I think I've had this position before. In fact, I remember a Nakamura game in this. David Anton. Yeah, just logical stuff. You prepare a flank attack with the pawn. I can play these positions, no problem. Looks like a King's Indian to some degree. I could very well see something like this happening, for sure. There's also Queen C2. You could take the knight, too, by the way. Take, and then even play Knight H4 or Knight E1. This is the old Ulf Anderson favorite. You can see the high drawing percentage in this, though. This produces historically a lot of draws. I think I'd rather keep a few more pieces on board. Yeah, Bishop D2. So I'm just trying to familiarize myself, guys, with how the game could theoretically go from here. C1. Not trying to memorize all this. Just get some ideas in my head. Take. Another hanging pawn position. Queen B3. Yeah. There's ways to outplay the opponent from here. Black's fine. This is a solid line, but ways I see we can try to outplay. Okay, well, I'm coming up on 10 minutes before the game, so I'm probably going to wrap this up pretty quickly. But yeah, I don't see a whole lot of surprises based on this player's games in the database that I can expect. It's always possible that he'll do something totally off the wall or have some very specific preparation. But he seems somewhat predictable with a low sample size. Again, if I was taking this prep beyond just the essentials here, Lichess database and the engine, I'd probably go look up his classical games, see what he does, if there's any difference there. Maybe we'll just look at, what does he do against C4 on move 1? C6. Yeah, again, hard to say if this was training or not. Some of these games are recent. There's some Panov type games. So possible he'll throw in C6 somewhere. But we'll know if I open with D4 and he plays D5, very likely it's going to be a Slav or perhaps a Tarrasch. But who knows? Maybe I'll deviate too. Like if E6 is played, maybe I'll play Knight F3, or if Black's really intent on getting to a Tarrasch, I can't really prevent it. But there's a few things I can do that maybe I won't reveal that I've done against players who play the Tarrasch who are intent on getting it. So in the interest of protecting some of my future prep, maybe I'll withhold that for now. C4, Knight F3. There's B6 in some games. It is interesting that against C4, on a very limited sample, just 8 games, he's only played C6 or B6. Only played C6 or B6. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to read into that too much. I think I'm just going to stick with my D4. D4, and I'm expecting Knight F6. What does he do against Knight F3? Just out of curiosity. There's one game from last year. Yeah, it's not too relevant. Bullet game. Probably plays E6, if I were to guess. So yeah, I think we're probably going to get this line. And I'm hoping we get a Queen's Indian defense, like so. Bishop B4, castles, castles. I'll try to get this position with Knight C3 on move 7. And we'll see if he goes D5 or Knight E4. Yeah, D5 I want to take. Knight takes, I think we were liking this. Queen C2, E4, Rook D1 type stuff. Pawn takes, can go Bishop F4. Usually take the pawn if allowed. Long-term pressure on the pawns, especially that D5 pawn, if we can generate it. Okay, I'm feeling pretty good. Let's get into this in 7 minutes. That's when the game starts, top of the hour. See you guys soon. All right, and here we are. Yes, good luck to Banana Monkey 20. Have fun. Let's open with D4 as planned. Here we go. Week 3 of the Lone Wolf League, season, I believe, 37. Season 37. Before we get into this game, thanks everyone so much for watching these videos, especially those of you who watch these all the way through. I'm just amazed that you guys want to dig into so much content, so I'm happy to provide it if it's interesting and useful for you guys. So we'll keep it up through this series and hopefully beyond. All right, so plays knight f6 as planned against d4. Let's go c4. So no early d5 for black. That was my suspicion, that he would avoid d4, d5. Drink check. So I've got my iced coffee. It's actually 2 parts iced decaf coffee, 1 part espresso. So not really true iced coffee. And I've also got my lemon ginger tea. So I'm going to work through both these beverages as the game progresses. So knight f3 on move 3. Yeah, just not interested in tangling with the Nimzo. Knight c3, bishop b4. Plays b6, so we get this Queen's Indian. Yeah, let's go g3. g3 is one of the most testing moves here, by the way. One of the theoretically most challenging. Okay, and actually plays bishop a6, so he's the first one to throw a curveball. Bishop a6 to hit the pawn. Now, I have faced this move before, and I've usually answered with queen a4. Okay, I've typically played queen a4. The idea for black in overshooting and playing the bishop out is that they're going to try to argue that any way that white defends the c4 pawn is deficient in some way. Okay, so if you play b3, that could constitute a weakness sometimes. Sometimes it makes bishop b4 attractive. If you play the queen to c2 or a4, sometimes that means less control of d5. I haven't really played knight bd2 much here, but that's actually the first move that comes to mind because I do recall some ideas with that move. So thinking about what my opponent might consider in his pregame prep, he's playing this quickly, maybe anticipated this line. He's probably thinking I'm going to play queen a4. So I could throw a small surprise in by playing queen c2, but I do know a lot of times those lines transpose. Queen c2, queen a4, although maybe not always, actually. Maybe not always. So queen c2, knight bd2, those are moves that come to mind. There's nothing wrong with queen a4. It's just I haven't looked at that line in a bit. Maybe that was a gap in my preparation, but I didn't see any indication that he would put the bishop on a6. So yeah, I'm leaning towards queen c2 or knight bd2. Queen c2 is maybe more consistent with what I'm looking to do in this game. So I could go for that. I could go for that one. Yeah, I'm going to do it. I think it'll be a slight surprise to him, and it's a natural move. Defend the pawn this way, but not overshooting the queen all the way to a4. So yeah, let's play queen c2. Knight bd2 is a developing move that defends the pawn, but it does block the dark square bishop. I think unless you're trying to get e4 in really quickly, knight bd2 isn't so attractive. So queen c2 it is. He pauses for a moment. I like to see that. Could be pausing for effect, though. I tried to do that in my last game against Gone Nowhere. If you'll recall in the opening, I hesitated on a move that I was sure I was going to play just to try to get my opponent to think that maybe I wasn't prepared in the position. Always a little more gamesmanship in these games where you actually get to prepare for your opponent. You have some time to do so. So queen c2. And I got to be honest, I don't really remember the theory here. I know a lot of times black does try to go c5 in these positions, but if black plays c5 in this exact position, what if I play d5 with the idea that on pawn takes d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, I have queen e4 check. Hit the king, hit the knight. And if knight e7, there's queen takes a8. I have to calculate if my queen gets trapped somehow there, but the fact that c5, d5 could be played is going to give something for black to think about. Because I think in the queen a4 version, c5, d5 isn't as good, although I don't rightly remember why, because if black does double capture, that could in fact transpose. So it's good that Banana Monkey's figuring that out and not me. A lot of times when black plays bishop a6, they just end up pulling the bishop back to b7. after white defends in some way, the c4 pawn. So again, they might try to claim that the way in which I defend that pawn on c4 on the prior move is a weakening move. So that's a feature of these bishop a6 lines. Plays bishop e7, okay. So could go bishop g2 as planned. e4 is a move I'm considering as well. Take the center. Seem to recall some type of line with e4, d5, c takes d5, bishop takes f1, king takes f1, e takes d5, e5. And then white parks the king on g2, plays knight c3. So I believe that's a thing. But bishop g2 looks much more consistent with what I typically do. And then we'll see, if I play bishop g2, we'll see whether black plays bishop e7 or wants to go d5. But either way, this is starting to look more like what I prepared for, just with the bishop on a6 versus b7. So bishop g2, d5, I'll probably take. Maybe knight e5 is also worth considering there. Yeah, let's play bishop g2, because I don't think I'm going to go e4. I think those lines with e4, d5 takes, that whole variation I mentioned, I think black's supposed to be fine there. They post the knight on e4. They try to go c5 or f5 later. So bishop g2 it is. Good luck to all of you who are playing these leagues, the Lone Wolf League and also the 45 plus 45. One thing I didn't mention in the first couple videos, if you have an established Lead Chess classical rating, you can late join these leagues. I don't know how many weeks, I should have checked this before I went live, but I don't know how many weeks into the season they allow you to join if you missed the first week but still want to play. But do check that out. Just because the season starts, it doesn't mean you're shut out for the rest of that season. Okay, black castles. So daring me to move the knight with the discovery against this rook on a8. But that doesn't appear to be too big of a problem, right? Knight e5, c6. No issues. So I'm probably going to castle, keep things flexible. Again, I could go for e4, but it just doesn't seem to make sense when black has the easy d5 reply. Yeah, let's castle. Now I'm wondering how long Banana Monkey's going to keep this bishop out here on a6. I'm going to call him Banana Monkey, by the way, instead of Nicholas, because Banana Monkey seems more appropriate for an online league where we're all playing under our usernames. Okay, so now plays the bishop back to b7. So this is very interesting, guys, because did I not just gain a tempo on my prep? Because this is the same position I prepared for, but my queen is now on c2 instead of d1. And the queen often ends up on c2 anyways in this line. So I could be misunderstanding something about this variation, and maybe knight c3, c5 is a good answer when I can't play d5. That actually could be the reasoning. Yeah, probably is the reasoning, actually. But knight c3, c5, d5, pawn takes, knight takes d5, bishop takes d5. There's knight g5 at the end, threatening checkmate, also threatening this. That actually looks vaguely familiar, that type of sequence. Well, it happens a lot when there's issues on that long diagonal. But knight c3, c5, d5 takes. I could also do the knight h4 thing, which is another idea I'm sort of borrowing. I don't think I'm going to play anything but knight c3 here, so let's just go for it. And let's see if black wants to go for c5 or maybe d5. Ultimately, it may not make a huge difference whether my queen's on c2 versus d1, but the fact that he hesitated a little bit, and this is in my wheelhouse as far as preparation, makes me feel good. I feel like I'm on solid footing here still. Yeah, because the queen on c2 helps support e4, but it does detract from playing d5. No doubt. Therefore, I'm going to be curious what black does. c5 or d5 suggest themselves. I don't know that you really have too many other moves to consider here. If you play something like d6 to prepare knight bd7, okay, it looks solid, but that allows white to go e4. And with the full complement of pieces on board, all the minor pieces in the game, nothing has been exchanged. White should definitely be better there. Quite a bit better, I think. Sometimes black can allow that. We saw some instances of that in the preparation, but black usually got something in return, like the bishop pair, or allowing white to play e4, d4, and grabbing so much space. But here, black's just going to be cramped if they allow that. So I'm going to go ahead and predict that black's going to play d5. I think d5 would be the most sensible move. If c5, I think I'm probably going to go for d5. I'm spending some of my time calculating it right now. But just on sight, I like the look of c5, d5, e takes d5, knight h4. Not so sure about pawn takes first, but knight h4. And I think that's an improved version of the pawn sack line that we saw Banana Monkey play against Siciliana Classica. Or actually accept the pawn sacrifice against Siciliana Classica. And the whole point is if white can take on d5 later, use the bishops on the same diagonal, also make use of the knight coming to f5 in a lot of lines, white is sitting pretty. So maybe there's something with c5, d5, pawn takes d5, knight h4, knight e4. That looks sort of familiar. But knight f5, I just trust that that's good for white. Yeah, and he does play d5. Makes sense. So on pawn takes, how do we think black is going to recapture? Probably pawn. Probably pawn. And am I going to play anything other than pawn takes? So again, this is my position from the prep, just that my queen is on c1, c2 instead of d1. Again, because my queen ended up on c2 in a lot of those lines I prepped, I think I'm pretty happy here. Let's take. Does take with the pawn. Okay. Now, I say I'm happy. I say that I like what's going on. But ultimately, that may only translate to a couple additional tenths of a pawn, maybe +4 instead of +0.2. Maybe it's not even much. Maybe the engine's not even going to say that the eval budges. But I'm happy. Seems good to me. I feel like I just got a useful developing move. Maybe it'll transpose even in some cases. I'm probably going to go bishop f4 here. Again, there's not a whole lot else I would consider. Seems early for rook d1. Seems early for knight e5. Yeah, let's play bishop f4. Post the bishop actively. So generally, we're looking to pressure black's d-pawn in this type of position. But a lot will be dependent on what black does with their c-pawn. If they go for c5, and we have the possibility of taking, then there's two pawn weaknesses, potential pawn weaknesses that we can play against. Maybe when black plays c5 and we play d takes c5, black takes with a piece. The bishop, or more commonly the knight if it's sitting on d7. That would result in a pure isolated queen's pawn scenario for black. So there too, we'd probably be looking to play against the d-pawn. Maybe black will try to dig in with c6, just reinforce. So most likely, the area of the board that we'll be focusing on is the center. Knight e5 crops up in a lot of these positions too. It's a logical outpost. There's also bishop h3 in some cases. For example, if knight bd7 and black tries to post a rook on c8, bishop h3 often works pretty well. Black can think about attacking my bishop on f4 with knight h5. I'm actually just thinking now what I would do against that. Probably pull the bishop back to e3 and argue that Although my bishop is slightly awkward on e3, wedged between the pawns, it's still probably better than the knight on h5. Come back to d2 and try to argue the same thing. So will black go for c5? Or will they punt on a decision like that and maybe play knight bd7? Knight a6 is something you see a lot too. Bring the knight out, but not interfere with any of the avenues in the center. Because knight bd7, you do block the defense of the d-pawn. So let me think about my potential replies to these moves. I've got some pressure towards c7, but I don't think it's worth anything at the moment. Okay, knight b5 is a threat, I believe, but it's highly unlikely that black's going to allow me to triple attack this pawn when they have no recourse. So I think almost certainly black's going to move the queenside knight or play c5. So c5, knight bd7, and knight a6. So those are the moves I'm looking at. Not looking at knight c6. That's just not in the spirit of this type of line. Blocking the bishop on b7, stepping in front of the c-pawn. So with pretty high confidence, I think it's going to be one of these moves. Maybe outside chance for knight h5 or something like rook e8. But rook e8 actually allows knight b5. Yeah, so black plays knight bd7. Probably the most sensible move of all. Yeah, and knight b5, d6 just doesn't seem to do much. Just looking at that briefly, but knight c7, rook c8, bishop c7, queen c8, that's not good. I'm overextended there. So here's where I can think about deploying my rooks to logical posts. Rook d1 makes a lot of sense in this type of position. Line up with the queen on d8. Even though there's a number of pieces in the way, black often does go for d5 later. So if this were a bullet game, rook fd1 is absolutely what I'd play. And even in a classical game, that can be plenty good, that reasoning. I could play knight e5. Just feels a little bit early to play knight e5. Not liking that move quite yet. Rook ac1, take the semi-open file, but I just found rook fd1 sometimes works out better. You can also try to play rook ad1 if you really think you might want to reserve e1 for the other rook. So I think this is between rook fd1 and knight e5. And I also think we're on typical territory, and I shouldn't spend too much time here. So if there's nothing I can point to with knight e5 that creates a concrete threat, I think I'm just going to play rook fd1. Yeah, let's go rook fd1. Nice preparatory move. It makes black think twice about c5. Because they could play with those hanging pawns, take back, but then knight e5 starts to make a lot more sense. I'm more primed to play that move. And the eval of those positions can be difficult for black in a hurry if they play c5 under unfavorable conditions. So c5, d takes c5, b takes c5, knight e5. Let's say knight takes e5, bishop takes e5. Already that looks tough for black because I'm threatening bishop takes f6. I'm using the pin against their bishop on b7. That probably wouldn't be too hot for them. One upside to playing rook ad1 instead of rook fd1, because this is the age-old question, right? Which rook do you put on a central square? So I do know, let's say c5, d takes c5, bishop takes c5 is played. Black opts for the isolated queen's pawn scenario. I do know there are instances where you gotta watch out for the attack on f2. With knight g4 in the mix, it's not out of the realm of possibility that f2 becomes weak in the future. But I wouldn't be unhappy to see this scenario. c5, d takes c5, bishop takes c5. I can play knight d4. Looks like a good move. Blockade the square right in front of the pawn. Block the bishop. So let's try to plan. Let's say black defers again with their next move. Maybe black plays rook c8, let's say. If black plays a constructive move, but not something committal, I think I start going into probing mode. I feel like I've mostly posted my pieces where they ought to go, anticipating a battle in the center, some sort of opening of the position in the middle. Yeah, I can throw rook ac1 in, but that's probably the only preparatory move, major preparatory move left for me. I think against a move like rook c8, I'm starting to look at the knight e5s, the bishop h3s. Bishop h3, like I said, is especially annoying against rook c8. So maybe I would go for that. Just ask black how they're going to deal with that pressure. I had an OTB game probably about 10 years ago that looks very similar to this, where my opponent did eventually go for c5 and then took with the knight. But Banana Monkey plays c6, so he's digging in. He is digging in. Maybe didn't like some of the knight b5 possibilities. Who knows? Okay. So c6 does block the light square bishop pretty significantly, but it solves some issues for black, no doubt. For example, if I play knight e5, black can take, knight takes e5, and on pawn takes e5, they can probably play knight d7, although maybe then e4, huh? e4, and if g5, bishop e3, knight takes e5, pawn takes d5. Ooh, I like the look of that position. Okay, so e4 and knight e5 come to mind. Knight e5 is kind of blunt. Maybe not so good because there is knight h5 as well as a reply. But a type of move I'm going to think about for sure. e4, how do I feel about this move? Pawn takes, knight takes, queen takes. We get a big old trade, knight f6. The knight's coming to d5. I can play that position and argue that black's pawn on c6 is weak, but e4 feels premature. It somehow feels premature. So I'm leaning towards bishop h3. I just like this move, especially if this diagonal, the h1, a8 diagonal, has become even more clogged. Maybe it's time to repost the bishop. Bishop h3. And that could prepare knight e5, right? Because bishop h3, let's say black passes rook e8 or something, knight e5, then there's no knight h5 because black's losing the knight on d7. So there is something to be said for that. Bishop h3, rook e8, knight e5. Let's say knight takes e5, d takes e5, then knight h5. What's going on there? Could play e4, but then knight takes f4, g takes f4, d4, knight e2, c5. Weird. That's a bit down the road. So bishop h3, for sure, a strong candidate move here. Knight e5 again. Just knight e5, knight h5, though. Not thrilled about that. I don't see anything too annoying I can do there. h4 sometimes. We saw an h4 type move in the prep in one of these positions, but looks a little abstract right now. I mean, I think I have to assume black's going to play rook e8 on the next move. That move just makes a lot of sense. So bishop h3, rook e8, knight e5. Knight takes e5. Don't really want to take with the bishop. It's just not in the spirit of playing knight e5. You want to take with the d pawn and try to lever open the d file. So bishop h3, rook e8, knight e5, knight takes e5, d takes e5, knight h5. Could pull the bishop back. Maybe simply bishop d2. Seems to leave that e5 pawn pretty lonely, though. It's the thing I dislike about it. And there's d4. But there's also bishop g4. It's annoying. Okay, I think I'm going to play bishop h3. I'm just looking at e4 one other moment. Looks a little too simplistic, and I'm hesitant to give him a Carol Khan type position, which he seems to be comfortable in. Knight f6, knight d5, that just seems too simple for black. The knight gets to a blockading square, hits the bishop. Even though there's some weakness of the c6 pawn, I don't think I have enough juice there, really, to cause problems. So, yeah, bishop h3, rook e8, knight e5. Knight takes e5, d takes e5. Knight h5. I think I can work with that position. I think I can work with that. Maybe even knight e4 is interesting at that point. Maybe. Yeah. Okay, let's play bishop h3. I lost my time edge, but we might make it back because it's not too much of a gap and it's black's move. I'm just not seeing the bishop really do much long-term on this diagonal. You know, sometimes white can play a3, b4, try to go for b5 against this structure. The pawn on c6, the pawn on d5. But when black establishes that pawn on c6, generally white is best off playing in the center versus trying to do anything on the queen side. Perhaps I'll still consider queen a4 under the right circumstances. If this rook leaves a8, for instance, and the pawn on a7 is loose. But for the moment, I'm mostly gonna ignore the queen side and just let black figure out how they're gonna untangle in the long run. Stands to reason they might want to play bishop c8 somewhere, but that's probably going to do more harm than good to their coordination in the short term. Because on bishop c8, the knight can't go anywhere. Next, I guess it could go to b8, but that looks kind of ridiculous. But I don't know. I've seen crazier moves. Bishop c8. I might play queen a4 against that one. Target the undefended pawn. Okay, so I'm going to look at this rook e8 move again because that's the move that just makes a lot of sense to me. If black plays something like knight h5 right away, they could do it. Yeah, no doubt they could do that, but it seems a little less flexible. Rook e8 that's where you want this rook. So rook e8, knight e5, knight takes e5, d takes e5, knight h5. I have a fair amount of options there. I can play e6, I'm seeing now. e6 looks interesting. And if knight takes f4, I take on f7 and then play queen f5 check, queen takes f4, bank a pawn. Yeah, black does play rook e8. Okay, so knight e5, knight takes e5, pawn takes e5. If knight d7, I feel like e4, e6, one of those two moves is going to be good. So knight e5. Knight e5, knight takes e5. D takes e5, knight h5. e6, is that what I'm liking now? Pawn takes e6, bishop takes e6, followed by knight e5. Looks crushing. Yeah, I think that just wins if I get that. Now, also on knight e5, I didn't articulate this, but if bishop d6, I think I win a piece with knight takes d7. There's also knight takes f7 and knight takes c6, but I think knight takes d7 straight up wins a piece. So let's play the knight forward, knight e5. If I don't play this move, I don't feel like I'm doing anything truly testing. So this is completely consistent with bishop h3. Let's go for it. Okay, looks like we're almost 30 minutes into this game. Time management wise, I think it's reasonable for both players. We're only 13 moves into the game, but it's definitely starting to feel like a middle game at this point. So I'm happy. This is my type of position. I feel like I should have ways to press here. I think this is slightly better for white. Looks reasonable for black, but their position looks slightly passive. They're going to have to solve some problems. And if I can keep this slight time edge that I have, that would be phenomenal. Even just a couple minutes. You guys have seen already through a couple rounds in this tournament how much that time advantage matters, even with the 30-second increment. Black takes. Okay. And am I doing anything other than pawn takes? I don't think I'm taking with the bishop because bishop d6 just seems too simple there. So pawn takes, I'm really curious. Knight h5? Probably going to be the move. But then I like that e6 move. Yeah. Take with the pawn. Knight h5 or knight d7? What's it going to be? I think knight h5 because knight d7 just doesn't feel right. It blocks the d file a bit, but it walks into e6. It walks into e4. At least with knight h5, black has this counter pressure against my bishop on f4. So this was the original continuation I was analyzing and was trying to find something against. Black does play it. Yeah, originally I was looking at bishop e3 or bishop d2, but I'm starting to come around to this e6 move. This was my justification for going for this. So let's just spend a moment figuring out if there's anything wrong with e6. If not, I'm going to play it. Oh, okay. Well, I already see something I did wrong. I made a mental error, guys. Pawn takes e6, bishop takes e6, king h8. I had the replicated piece in my head. I said knight e5 and I was winning, but clearly I don't have a knight anymore. Okay, that's not a disaster, but that was a visualization error on my part. Ooh, but there's interesting stuff. Can I play e6, pawn takes e6, bishop takes e6, king h8? Could I even play knight takes d5 there? Idea, pawn takes d5, bishop c7, trap the queen. Black does have rook to c8. It's a nifty idea, though. Kind of a nifty idea. Okay, but this matters a lot. So if e6, pawn takes, bishop takes, king h8 is playable, probably black's going to be fine because I might have to just retreat this dark square bishop at some point. But now I'm looking at this idea with knight takes d5. I wonder if that's an option. All hinges, I think, on rook c8 at the end. Bishop takes c8, queen takes c8. Maybe I don't have enough there. Probably don't. Probably don't. That's too bad because I was excited about e6, but maybe it just fizzles after f takes e6, bishop takes e6, king h8. Can I go bishop f7 there? Bishop f7, hit the rook and the knight. Knight takes f4, bishop takes e8. Knight h3 check. Well, that's interesting. That looks kind of scary down the long diagonal, but that might be playable. e6 takes, bishop takes, king h8, bishop f7. Knight takes f4, bishop takes e8. Probably knight h3. I mean, knight h3 just looks consistent there. Knight h3, king g2. Black can get one pawn. King takes f2. They might have decent compensation. Hard to say. Hard to say. Okay, so I'm kind of going down the rabbit hole at e6. What are my alternatives? Bishop e3, bishop d2. I don't like bishop e3 because I'd really like to free up my e-pawn. But it may actually make some sense because I can still go f4, try to snake the bishop back. It holds up d4 as well. So not the craziest move, but also not one I'm jumping for joy to play. By the way, if I do move this bishop, I am threatening g4. Maybe there's bishop c8, but g4 starts to become a thing. And if g6, maybe then I play e6, pivot back. So I was looking at bishop d2 as well, but that has some problems too. It blocks the file. You could argue maybe bishop c1. All these moves have drawbacks. Bishop e3 blocks the e-pawn. Bishop d2 blocks the rook. Bishop c1 interferes with my rook coordination. Leaning towards bishop e3 in this position. Knight, bishop g5. Bishop e3, bishop g5, f4. Is there rook takes e5? Pawn takes e5, bishop takes e3. Black might have some compensation there. Maybe. Hard to say. Looking back at e6, there's also e4. But e4, I just wasn't really finding much in this line. Knight takes f4, g takes f4, d4. Just coming up a bit short there. Knight e2, c5. Black has the bishop pair. I think black should be good. Okay, one more time with e6. Takes, bishop takes, king h8. And this bishop f7 move, something about this line, knight takes f4, knight takes e8, knight h3, king g2. It just looks very risky to me. I feel like I could get hurt in that line. Even with something like knight takes f2. It's critical, though. There's no doubt e6 is critical. And possibly black won't even take, but I have to assume that they're going to take. Take, king h8. It's too bad. Knight takes d5 is really nice as well, but I can't make that line where I get counterpinned work. Ah, can I play rook c8 in that line, actually? Ooh, hold up. e6 takes, bishop takes, king h8. Knight takes d5. Pawn takes d5, bishop c7, rook c8. I can reinforce. Black does have rook takes c7, queen takes c7. Queen takes, rook takes. And what is going on in that position? I'm hitting the bishop. Also, bishop f7 remains a thing. Ooh. Ooh. Interesting. Very interesting. E6 is the move I really want to play, so I'm sort of biasing towards that. E6 takes, bishop takes, king h8. Again, I would consider king f7, but knight takes d5 is so thematic. Pawn takes d5 is pretty much forced there, I think. And then bishop c7, which I'm not hallucinating, right? That traps the black queen with this bishop crisscross. The only thing black can do is rook c8. Then I play rook c1 to defend my queen and reinforce the threat. And we're going to have most likely a trade. Most likely a trade. I mean, that looks messy. Maybe black can play that, but I think I'm going to have pretty good chances there. It looks loose for black. If my rook gets to the back rank, there's going to be a lot for black to calculate. Just not seeing much with these moves. I think these are slow. I don't have a good vibe about them. All right, let's go for it. Let's play e6. Took a lot of time on that move, but I hope to be making it up in the coming moves. Again, this is the move you want to play. It took me a while to spot it from afar. It might not even work. Maybe black's fine in all this, but it's the move you want to play. My dark square bishop is hindered by that e-pawn. I have the bishop on h3 supporting it. Black's very solid otherwise if I have to retreat. So I spent, what, 4 or 5 minutes on that move probably? A lot of time. But this could be one of the most impactful decisions in the game. I didn't spend a whole lot of time on moves other than f takes e6. It's possible black will play something else, but nothing else looks that challenging to me. Maybe bishop c8 is something I should have looked at. Nah, but I think at minimum after take on c8 with h7 hanging, that looks sketchy for black. Maybe, though. Maybe they could take with the queen, somehow make that work. Looks suspect, though. By the way, on bishop c8, bishop c7, or actually still knight takes d5 is the thing, isn't it? Bishop c8, still knight takes d5. Then it works very cleanly. C takes d5, bishop c7, and there's no rook to put on c8. This is a motif, this bishop crisscross to try to win the queen. Happens in the Queen's Gambit declined a lot. So even though this was a Queen's Indian defense, there's some parallels here. So f takes e6, bishop takes e6, check, king h8. King f8 is not a critical move. I think queen takes h7 there should just be good for me. So king h8, knight takes d5. C takes d5, bishop c7. Because I hallucinated the knight being on f3 still in the other line, I'm just running this through in my head to make sure I'm not missing something. But I think black has to play rook c8 at that point. It's the only way to create counterplay and save the queen. So if bishop takes d8, rook takes c2. But then rook c8, I'm playing rook a c1, renewing the threat. Rook takes c7, queen takes c7, hits the bishop on b7. Also bishop f7's in the air. I'm on the 7th rank. Stands to reason, queen takes c7 will be played, rook takes c7. I didn't fully proof that position, but it feels like it should be good for me. Even if we get into some rook and a pawn or two versus two minor piece scenario, I like that my rook is broken to the 7th rank. That should cause a lot of problems for black. Back rank issues, the pawn on a7 is loose in a lot of lines. That looks promising. Dynamic position here, guys. Very interesting. For me, I have to cap my curiosity for this position and the resulting complications and be practical going forward. I have trouble with that, but I've still got 14 and a half minutes. But we've seen, for example, in that game against Terror MT and also round 2, just how quickly those minutes can get eaten up. Oh, shout out to the streamers who are streaming this game. I think one was Flippy Flappy. So Flippy Flappy, if you're there, thank you very much. Yeah, and black plays knight takes f4. So I always kind of assumed that this would just be at least good for me. But why did I make that assumption, actually? Did I think I was winning a pawn? I think I thought I was winning a pawn in this line. Yeah, another mistake. Take, check. That's actually just equal material. King g8, I take on f4. Moreover, black has the two bishops. So I'm confused why I thought that was winning a pawn. Maybe I thought I could win h7 somewhere. I don't know. All right, well, I spent a lot of time figuring out what happens on this, but now knight takes f4. Well, let's try to adjust. So I can simply just take if I want, but black's going to hide their king in the corner and probably argue that that's fine. So I can expose the king. I probably should still do that. But the fact that I traded my dark square bishop and the knight takes d5 stuff is no longer going to work is really annoying. Yeah. Black's probably thinking, this is obvious. Can't I just take the bishop? there any other complications I can throw at black here? Taking on f7 seems good, but yeah, I don't know why queen f5. I think because of the way that the pawns were situated, it just seems to me that I'd want a pawn. But we actually have majorities on both sides, 4 and 4. And now I've lost my bishop pair. Okay, it's not a complete disaster. Take, just take f4. Force black to play some move to guard against queen takes h7. Life goes on. But it wasn't in the plan. This might end up transposing too, especially if I take on f4 first. Black takes back, bishop takes. Yeah, I think I have to take f7 and then just take on f4. And hope that I can get some decent play out of that. But it's a really strange miss on my part. But yeah, let's take f7. And then we'll take. So these are moments in the game where you can really start to doubt yourself. You start thinking like, oh, how could I have missed that? Like the knight appearing on e5, just missing that I wasn't up a pawn here. But you got to lock in and try to refocus, right? It sounds cliche, but there's still an entire game to be played. This position is probably fine still. Maybe if black plays this right, they're going to have a slight edge with the bishop, but their light square bishop is still buried. Their king is open. For the moment, they got to address queen takes h7. So I need to keep in mind that black is still feeling a little unstable themselves. I wonder on king g8, by the way, if bishop f5 might be a decent move to try to provoke some weaknesses. Because if g6, I can probably sack. Bishop takes g6, pawn takes, queen takes. And I'll have a perpetual more than likely there if I want it. Maybe I can even play for a win. Maybe. So that's a possibility. Yeah, king g8, bishop f5. Because if black plays h6, then I get some wiggle room for my bishop. Probably black will play bishop c8 sometime, but I still have that e4 lever. Probably try to hide my king on h1 somewhere. But now the knight takes d5 stuff, I'll just reiterate, none of that's working anymore. I don't have the bishop that can land on c7. So I'm not going to completely forget about that. Like if black plays queen c7 somewhere and blunders knight takes d5, that's great, but it's probably not going to work anymore. Also, another thing too that I personally struggle with in this type of scenario, I'm analyzing now in my head, or I'm trying to resist the urge to analyze in my head bishop e3 and bishop d2, or maybe even bishop c1 instead of the e6 move that I was trying to force. But we're going to put that aside till after the game. I can't waste precious competitive moments thinking about what could have been. So let's say king g8. I've been pretty good at predicting what black's going to do aside from this last move. So let's say king g8. Bishop f5. If h6, probably h6 will be played. h6. Maybe I start maneuvering. Maybe I start with king h1 in that position. e3 is always going to be an attractive stabilizing move. But maybe king h1 for flexibility's sake. Now, I mean, king g8 is not the only move for black. I think black might be able to play bishop f6 with the idea that if queen takes h7, which is my threat in the current position, then rook h8. And I can't go queen f5 check is the point. I can still go queen f5, but then bishop c8. Okay, and he plays bishop c8 right away. Interesting. Yeah, similar idea. Similar idea. So if queen takes h8, rook h8 with the skewer, that checks out. I do think black's going to win material there. However, I wonder if this is an error because maybe I switch the bishop back now, bishop g2. Queen takes h7 is on the cards again. But importantly, there's some stuff popping off on d5 all of a sudden. Would take, I might get at that rook on a8. Not to mention e4 in the air. So I wonder if black has missed bishop to g2. Another line I got to look at, bishop takes c8. Let's say queen takes c8. Then this would work again, but probably black's going to play queen takes c8. Queen takes c8. So on queen takes h7, there's always queen g4, queen takes f4. Maybe with rook h8 thrown in somewhere. So could consider bishop takes c8, but I think bishop g2, that feels right, actually. And it's a thematic move, too, when black has stepped off the long diagonal. I like the look of it. Keeps a piece around my king, too. My king is starting to feel kind of exposed. I do like the look of this move, I gotta say. I'm going to go for it. And I want to try to take the time back. Make black think, get that time edge back if I can, or at least pull even. And I think this is going to give black something to think about. It would be an easy move to miss. And I don't think I articulated why bishop c8 didn't feel quite right to me, but just this feel that it weakened the diagonal too much now. Even with this pawn on c6, you saw plenty when I was examining knight takes d5 and then bishop c7 in that fantasy line. There's lots of circumstances where we could tee off on that d pawn with or without the e4 pawn lever. So now, as far as I can see, I've got not only queen takes h7 on board when rook h8 doesn't skewer my queen and my bishop, but I also have knight takes d5 lurking. Pawn takes d5, bishop takes d5. Double attack on the king and the rook in the corner. So let's see if that causes black to burn some time. Maybe Banana Monkey will sacrifice a pawn and play something like bishop e6 to reinforce d5. Give me the pawn on h7 and just say, you know what, I'm going to play rook h8. You're going to retreat somewhere. And maybe in the long run, I hope to attack the pawn on h2. That could be reasonable. But certainly compared to my oversight past couple moves ago, this seems like a welcome change of pace. And that's going to take a while for black to figure out. Okay, I'm coming up on finishing my iced coffee, iced espresso. Still got the ginger tea, but it's pretty cold at this point. Not going to lie. Hope this is revealing for you guys. You can see I made a couple errors visualization-wise, which are interesting to me, just from an academic sense and trying to understand my own thought process. I'm not surprised I'm making some of these errors. I'm a little sleep deprived this week. There's been a lot of stuff going on, some stressful stuff, just personally for me. Nothing major, fortunately, but just, little stressors. I can feel like my chest is a little scatterbrained this week. At the same time, I don't want to speak that into existence. I'm a good player. I can strike and win a game tactically at any moment. So I'm going to pounce if I get the opportunity here, and I'm going full throttle. And you always assume you're going to continue making good decisions, even if you just made a bad one. This is a tough moment for black. Maybe bishop d6 is a move to consider. Although that may still allow knight takes d5, actually. Even with the d file being blocked. Because I was thinking bishop d6, knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, bishop takes d5 check, bishop e6. But I can take on a8. And if black takes back with the queen, I have rook takes on d6. And if bishop e6, there's, I think, queen b3 check at the end. Fork the king and the bishop. Black tries to set up a mate on g2. Okay, and my move had the desired effect. Now I'm up 2 minutes on the clock. That's great. Let's keep pushing that. I honestly don't see a way black can avoid losing a pawn here. Haven't analyzed this terribly deeply, but knight takes d5 is a serious issue. Because not only do you lose the pawn, but the floodgates open on the d file, even on the long diagonal towards the black king. That becomes a problem. The other long diagonal, h1, a8, becomes an issue too. So I think this threat has to take priority for black. They have to consider what they're going to do about that. d4 doesn't really help because you're not threatening to take the knight with the pin here. You could maybe play bishop takes c6, but also just queen takes h7. Black's jammed in the center too. The queen can't easily escape. One thing I don't think I mentioned yet, but if queen c7, there's knight takes d5. Maybe I did mention that. That's a devastating move. That's how we can use the c file in another instance. So I think Banana should, try to find some way to take the sting out of knight takes d5. But maybe I can still play it here, guys. Knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, bishop takes d5 check. If bishop e6, at minimum I can take and go in the queen. Black does have 2 pieces and a rook. I get a bunch of pawns. I can take the pawn on h7. That'd be interesting. There's also queen f5 to consider. Ooh, yeah, a lot of interesting stuff there. All right, so I'm going to look at knight takes d5, no doubt. But I'm also just going to look at queen takes h7, the safe option. Knight takes d5 is the move I'd love to play if it worked. Knight takes d5, pawn takes d5. So my main idea is if bishop takes d5, king f8, I think queen takes g8 is killer. Threatening queen g8 mate. That's got to be devastating. I don't see a good move there for black. So on knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, bishop takes d5, is Banana Monkey completely relying on bishop e6? Because, boy, that looks awfully dangerous. That looks awfully dangerous. Well, there too, actually, did I just hallucinate that as well? I thought black was getting multiple pieces, but knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, bishop takes d5 check, bishop e6. Nah, I'm taking, even in the simplest case, take and take the queen. They don't have their light square bishop anymore. Okay, so that's just going to be good for me. So knight takes d5. What's really to calculate? Pawn takes d5. Bishop takes d5 check. Okay, I mean, there's king f6. Probably what he's going to have to go for, but queen c3 check, king g6, queen g3. I guess the king can hide on h6. Lots of discovered attacks too. Okay, so this is where time is getting low. I have a critical decision, but I also have this other safer option. So knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, bishop takes d5, king f6. You know, I kind of like just playing maybe e4 in that position. Is e4 crazy? To try to go e5? Oh, and you know, take king f6, queen c3, king g6. I can always play bishop e4 there, can't I, to win the queen again. Okay, let me look at knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, bishop takes d5, king f8 one more time, because that is critical. Queen takes h7, threatening queen g8 mate. The bishop can move a number of places, but I just, without calculating too deep there, I have queen f7, queen g8, queen f7, I mean. The king's going to get forced right into the line of fire. Discoveries. Just highly doubt that black's going to survive. Queen takes h7. Like a bishop d6, queen g8 or h8, whichever. King e7, queen takes g7. And that's actually checkmate in that situation. Yeah, black's not going to survive that. No way. I think I'm going knight takes d5. I'm liking this. And I see a lot of lines where I win a queen for a rook and a knight, but I also get 2 pawns in the process too. Just excellent trade. And I think in this line where the king goes to f6, I think just queen c3 is winning. Forces black onto a light square, and then bishop e4 and go take the queen in that case. Black will still have some outside chance of counterplay, but it's should be winning. So the other thing is on knight takes d5, can black play other moves? Certainly they can do other things, but it's such a devastating move. Queen takes c6, queen takes h7 still in the air. Yeah. All right, let's go for it. Knight takes d5 it is. Couple of passive moves for black. Bishop c8 and then rook b8. I think safe to say bishop g2 caught black by surprise. Let's close this out strong. Still got work to do. Still things that can happen here. So queen takes c6 is a follow-up at minimum. Maybe queen takes h7. Okay, black probably saw what I was up to because they did eventually, or did quickly play this move. So maybe going for some counterplay towards f2. Fair. Queen takes h7. I guess rook h8 will be the answer then. b4 feels like a good move here. But then bishop takes f2 perhaps. Maybe some outside chances for black there. King takes f2. Queen h4. King g1. Take d5. I do have queen c7 though at the end. That's nice. So b4 is a move. Queen takes h7. And also knight moves too. Like knight e3 would be a safe-ish looking move. But I think this queen is bound for h4. b4 feels like the right move here. Because I don't like this bishop sitting on the c5 square. I want to get rid of that. Queen takes h7 doesn't seem right. Don't like that there's rook h8. Maybe with queen h4 on the way. So b4, bishop takes f2, king takes f2. Let's say queen h4. King g1. Black has to take on d5, and I think I have queen c7 check at the end. Fork the king and the bishop, or the king and the rook, rather. That should be good. Maybe there's some issues with rook takes e2 at the end, but yeah, I want to get rid of this bishop on c5, and I don't see a great discovery for the knight. Maybe knight d3 or knight b4 to d3. There's one way I could play. b4, it really speaks to me. I feel like that's the right move. b4, bishop takes f2, king takes f2, queen h4. Maybe king f1 is just simpler there. Keep e2 defended. Could be. Let's play it. Let's go b4. I'm going to pre-move the capture on f2 if black goes desperado mode. Try to bank some time for, or save some time for take, queen h4, deciding where I'm going to put the king. Sort of relying on that queen c7 idea at the end. I do think that's good. Yeah, so this is played. So king f1 or king g1? King g1 was my first instinct because it looks safer. But pawn takes d5, queen c7 check. Defends the f4 pawn too, though, actually. Kind of nice. And I can also play bishop takes d5 at minimum in these lines. There's queen f5 ideas too. Maybe I should go king g1. King f1. It's tough to tell the difference between these two moves. There's also bishop h3 stuff I have to reckon with in the end. Okay, I'm going to go king g1. I don't know that spending another minute is going to help me discern the difference, so I want to bank some time because this is still kind of complicated. So I'm up a piece right now. It stands to reason black is going to take back, and then I'll have to decide if I think queen c7 is going to work out. So queen c7 check. Let's say king f8 at that point. Queen takes b8. Rook takes e2. Queen d6 check. And then I can get in connection with this pawn and defend. So even in the case of queen, yeah, okay, I think queen c7 should work. I think it should work. I mean, black's like 2 moves away from being able to do something. I think picking up the rook should give me all the leverage I need. So queen c7. My backup move is bishop takes d5 or rook takes d5. I think queen c7 should do it. Queen c7. It's just a lot of material. And with the queen snaking back by a series of checks, it feels like it should work. I even have rook d5 next if I need it. So let's say queen c7 check, rook e7, queen takes b8, rook takes e2. Queen c7. I think I get back with checks in all cases. At least it feels that way. So bishop takes d5 again. Okay, let's go for it. Kind of a tough call for black too, where to put their king, or do they block with the rook? I'm actually not sure. I would think rook e7. I think rook e7 gives black the best chance in theory. Rook e7, queen takes b8. Rook takes e2. Queen c7 check is the move I like there. It forces black's king onto an awkward square, where I either get more checks or my queen is getting closer to being able to assist somehow in the defense. This somewhat reminds me of my game against Terror MT from round 1. Black plays bishop d7, so that's not really testing because when I take, I can defend e2 very simply at the end. It does connect the rooks, but I think black had to give the rook there to have any chance. So do I throw in bishop takes d5? Nah, king e7. Probably not even worth calculating. Yeah, just take the bishop. Hides the king. But okay, now queen takes d5, queen f3. And that is a very safe position with an extra piece and a pawn to boot. Looks very, very safe. Let's do it. Yeah, queen f3. Defend both pawns. Maybe e4 or e3 if I get a chance. So that was the case, bishop d7. I was relieved to see that move because rook e7, queen takes b8, rook takes e2. I still have to calculate there to make sure that queen f2, queen takes g2, or rook takes g2 doesn't ever land. And again, I think I was checking in queen c7, getting the queen back in the defense. But bishop d7 just made it a lot easier because at that point, black's going to lose material no matter what. It doesn't really matter if you're down a bishop or a rook in this scenario. You got to play the move that gives you the best tactical chance. And this one didn't really give black a tactical chance, unfortunately for them. Okay, so queen e7 attacks the two pawns. Good try, good try. Rook d4 is something I could do, or e4, let black take the b pawn and then shove the other pawn to e5. I kind of like rook d4 though, because if black wants to trade, I'm cool with that, but I want to also be able to prosecute a trade of some sort. Yeah, rook d4 looks nice and practical. a3, another way to do this, and just trade on e2. But I like these coordinating moves whenever possible. Rook d4, queen takes e2, queen takes, rook a to d1, h6, let's say. Always go rook d2. Yeah, these pawns are a bit split, but I think I like keeping my queen side intact. Let's do it. Mm-hmm. Okay, trade. Play this one over, so if takes, there's mate. Finally get the queenside rook in the game. Move 29. Better late than never. Yeah, h6 makes sense. And here I was thinking just rook d2, rook 1 to d2. Originally I thought rook d8, but I think rook 1 to d2 might even be cleaner. Rook d8 also plenty good though. Rook d8, take, king h7, then bishop d5 at the end. Bishop d5. Hard for black to attack my pawns. Maybe that's also just leaving very little chance of a defense. So rook d2, rook e8. I mean, all these are fine. I could trade and then play a4 in that situation, a4, b5. That also looks really good. But we want to leave no chance. Cleanest possible win. What about rook d8, rook takes d8, rook takes d8, king h7, bishop f1, with the idea of rook takes a2, bishop d3, force g6, and then I have bishop takes g6 and also f5 coming. Is there any issue with maybe an opposite color, a wrong color bishop thing? Probably not. That's looking excellent. Just a question of how many trades I'm okay allowing. Pawn trades, that is. Yeah, I mean, there's no need to stress about this too much, but I do feel like I want to play a couple more accurate moves and really put this one away. So rook 1 to d2, rook e8. Rook takes a4. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Rook a2, b5. Just keep all the pawns on board. Yeah, that should be good. Let's do that. No reason I couldn't have played a4 as well, but it's nice to block the second rank. So now Banana Monkey's got a big time advantage, but shouldn't matter. Just up a clean piece here. The only thing is my pawn structure is very slightly worse, but for a full piece with this many pawns on board, that's a minuscule factor. Always have to be accurate, though. Always make a point to be accurate. Hmm. Okay, so he wants to preserve both rooks, which makes sense. Actually, didn't really consider that, but it makes sense. So maybe rook d7, take the 7th rank. Let's do that. My bishop covers e4, so I'm not worried about rook e4. a5. And now I was thinking about playing b5 and squeezing black. I like the look of this move because it's hard for black to attack my queenside pawns. I can always get bishop c6 in later if I want to cement that situation. So it looks nice. Probably rook f8 will be played. Rook f8 and maybe rook e8 to come. Yeah. Okay. So there's also rook b7 in some circumstances I could think about. But let's just play rook on d2 to d4. And on rook e8, I think I will simply bring up the king and cover these squares, e1, e2, and e3. I'm not going to worry about g5. I think if black plays g5, probably rook d6 is very clean there. Hit the pawn on h6, hit the pawn on b6. So yeah, my thought process is get black to play their other rook over somewhere away from the b pawn. And while they're grasping at counterplay, trying to make something happen with the rooks on the e and the f files, then pivot to attack the b pawn somewhere. I think that's a decent plan. And if rook f6, if black tries to double somewhere, I think rook d6. I would still love to force a rook trade if allowed. Yeah, I think the way I played it in allowing black to keep both rooks on the board was definitely unnecessary, but I don't think it changes much. Yeah, rook over. So bishop c6 is a move I could play. I think I like that. Bishop c6 block. It's consistent. And still on rook e8, probably king f2. I think even though on g5 the b pawn is sort of blocked off, I could still go rook b7. I could also still go rook h6, hit the rook and hit the pawn on h6. You just don't want to trade too many pawns in this situation. Definitely don't need to play a rook and bishop versus rook or something. Title Tuesday special. So Banana Monkey's no doubt trying to figure out some way to get counterplay, but it's really too little too late at this point. But until I can get a pair of rooks off the board, I'm not going to completely relax. And even then, no need to relax. But yeah, I'm regretting I just didn't trade a pair of rooks. It's still fine, but I got to work a little bit harder now, probably. So rook b7, how do we like that? Rook b7, I like it because rook takes b6 and also rook d7 are in the mix. There's bishop e4 too. So yeah, rook b7 looks very nice here. Let's play it. This rook on d4, beautifully placed. Guards the d file, guards the f pawn. Black's remaining rook is out of the game. If rook b8, I can get my rook trade that I've been looking for. I think rook f6 is a move that comes to mind, but even on rook takes b6, rook g6, check, king f2, this threat of bishop e4 is extremely annoying. Yeah, so black does play rook b8. So do I double rooks or just trade? Probably just trade. Yeah, let's just swap. Play bishop e4 maybe. Force that king back again. Check. If g6, there's rook d7. And on that move, I'm thinking rook d6. I could also try to go very clinical here and play bishop g6. It's an interesting one. With the idea of rook e4, totally locking black in, looking for rook e8 at some point. That would be the way to try to put black in Zugzwang somewhere. It's actually kind of a cool way to play it. I kind of like that. Leaves black with almost no options whatsoever. Bishop g6, king f8, rook e4. And black's simply forced to stay tied down to the back rank. And I can walk my king up. I can play rook e6 eventually. I think black's going to be in Zugzwang somewhere with that setup. Yeah, let's go for it. Nice pattern. A bishop, when it dominates the light squares like that and sets up a rook to come to the same color diagonal on the back rank. I think this is a nice pattern to conclude this game with. Yeah, black trying to flee towards the center, but now we slam the door. And black has to guard against rook e8 at all times. And in a situation like this, we can already plan ahead schematically because black has so few moves, right? Yeah, they might try to bring their rook over and check, but the rook's always going to have to go back to c8 very soon. So I can bring my king up probably as far as the 5th or even the 6th rank. I can probably get my king all the way into the 6th rank, actually. play rook e6. King comes up behind the rook. And if black plays rook d8 at that stage with the white king on e5, trying to stop king to d6, I play some sort of waiting move, maybe with a pawn. And if black ever plays king g8, we're going rook e8 and forcing a rook trade. And if black moves the rook away from d8, then my king can infiltrate, go after the b pawn, and that'll be lights out. Black has a couple pawn moves themselves, but those are going to be exhausted soon. Yeah, so I think rook e6 is a nice move here. It's by no means necessary, but it's a nice one to just highlight how helpless black is. The checks don't matter. I'm looking at the checks, but always they have to go right back to defend against rook e8. And no stalemate potential with black having g8, king g8 in the mix always, along with some pawn moves. But we should keep that on our radar too. Yeah, rook c8. So could take the b pawn, but I don't even see a reason to. I can just bring the king up. Rook c2 is not an option because my king or my bishop defends. Let's just walk the king. Keep walking. There's one of the pawn moves. Now, do I go after the pawn? Do I play a3 perhaps? Maybe a3. Just to put the brakes on black's pawn. Let's do that. This pawn's on a light square too, so if king g8 and we trade, I can go win it with the bishop. King d4. Let's do it. Now, I could break the plane here, but I think king e5 is more fitting. And actually, at this point, we're getting into a scenario where I could win by sacrificing a piece because my king has such dominant position. I would have to calculate a couple things there. I mean, not really. There's no real pawn break, but it's very much unnecessary. So I think I'm just going to play king d6 now. Infiltrate. We're coming right to c7. I wonder if I can trap their rook. I can almost pull it off, but not quite. So rook a8. So if I go king b7, there's rook d8. So is there a way to solve that? Or just take the pawn? I don't see how I can control both of these squares without lifting the blockade. Because if I play bishop e4, although bishop e4 is nice kind of because because their rook could get trapped on the a file is what I'm thinking. It's totally unnecessary. Rook e8 wins too, like I said. Let's go with the capture. Attack the rook. Attack the rook again. Push. And with king g8, I mean, I'm being vigilant for stalemates here, but there's no stalemates. Take, and I think we're going to have a nice conclusion to this one. It's a near stalemate, right? It's a near stalemate. But we get this pattern in the end. Okay. Thank you to Banana Monkey for the game. Yeah, so a game where I certainly missed some stuff visualization-wise in that middle game. And I think Banana Monkey was playing quite well and seeing the position well with the knight takes f4 stuff. But I think the switchback, bishop c8, bishop g2, I think that threw them. And admittedly, I didn't see a great move for black at that point. Maybe there's some way to escape with just a slight disadvantage, but that I think was a game changer. Bishop c8, bishop g2. So I sort of stumbled into that. Yeah, I'm not happy that I made that one visualization error where I thought on e6, f takes e6, bishop takes e6. I had the knight coming to e5 that wasn't on the board, the phantom knight. Probably my biggest visualization error, though. Hard to say if it's even visualization, but the misassessment was thinking in the line where e6, knight takes f4, e takes f7 is play that I was up a pawn somehow with queen f5, queen takes f4. I don't know why I thought that. I think it might have been because of the pawn structure being a little unusual with the majorities. So that was a miss on my part. And, you know, an IM, a GM could definitely punish me for something like that. Could turn the tide. So I'll be curious what the computer says round about that position. I have a feeling Banana Monkey was fine. And maybe even slightly better here. I really thought King G8 was going to be played. King G8, defend the pawn, hide the king in the corner. I don't think I have much in the center. I was looking at E4 type stuff, Bishop F5, but it doesn't feel like it's going to be substantial enough, you know? So I think King G8, hide the king. So I'll be curious what the computer says about C6 and how maybe I could have handled this better. It feels like white should be better, but I don't think based on how I played it, and especially this E6 move, this felt like a move I was forcing. I don't think this was the way to punish that. Yeah, and later, Banana Monkey made a big practical mistake by playing Bishop D7 here, which allowed me to coordinate, safeguard everything. So when you're in a dead losing position like this, even if playing Rook E7 ends up losing in a bloodier way, you kind of got to try it. Maybe it's simple, but simple as far as how white wins after that. But you got to try something like Rook E7, Queen takes B8, Rook takes E2, just to give yourself a shot with Queen F2 or Rook takes G2 and some light square checks coming. But I think it was probably over at that point. I'm curious if B4 was a good move. Felt like the right move. Black could take on D5, but given that I'm already up a pawn, I think good things are happening. The H7 pawn is still loose for black too. So yeah, this all felt pretty good. I'm pretty sure after knight takes D5, white is doing beautifully. Okay, let's click into this. Let's see what the chat says. We had some viewers on this one, about 25 or 30 viewers, it seems like. Thanks, everyone. Just tell them thanks for watching. Yeah, so I'm in a nice pace with these games where I typically play them a little bit later in the work week, like Thursday, Friday, and then I try to post them over the weekend on Sunday, usually. So I'll try to do the same thing. I'm playing this on a Friday. I'll try to post it on Sunday. Okay, so yeah, we had this Bishop A6 twist that Banana Monkey threw at me. Bishop A6, which according to the database, Banana Monkey has never played, but is a legitimate line. Yeah, and in the Masters database, we can see the different ways white responds to that. The threat of bishop takes C4, B3, queen C2, queen A4. I think for me, let's look at what I usually do here, just to try to put myself in the eyes of my opponent. Oh, interesting. So actually, queen C2 is my most played move. I could have sworn that I played queen A4 more than once. I was almost positive queen A4 was my top move here, but it looks like I played all these moves. Queen C2, knight BD2, queen A4. So maybe queen C2 wasn't really a surprise. Okay, one of these games, the Lee Chess database already has it. It's the game against Banana Monkey I just played. And these were bullet game, blitz game. Huh, that's funny. I thought I was psyching black out a little bit with that, but probably not. Yeah, so queen C2 and C5 is the critical move, or at least the most popular. How does this go? So take, take. Yeah, you don't take because queen A4 is just winning here, right? Yeah, that is crushing. One strong player fell into that. So how does black handle this? Now bishop b7 to attack the pawn. Bishop g2. Uh-huh. And this is another one of these gambit lines. Okay, so you actually don't protect the pawn. And you try to generate compensation. Knight c6, because if rook takes d5, there's knight b4. Okay, yeah, this looks a little familiar. I'm just not familiar with the details. Yeah, and this would have been roughly similar to what Banana Monkey did against Siciliana Classica in that game. White trying for a lot of games here, a lot of games that end in a draw. So this is apparently a pretty well-known line that can end in a draw or equality. Wow. A ton of draws in the Masters database. 97 games, and I think all but one of them ended in a draw. All right. Well, those of you who play Bogo Indian, fill us in on this. What's the current state of theory in this variation? There's some pawn sack potential. I mean, white could also take on c5 or play bishop g2, but this is where the bishop often does come back to b7 somewhere. Looks like knight c6 gets played too. Yeah, take, bishop takes. I played positions along these lines before, usually with queen a4 and the bishop coming back here. Black's fine. Black has 2 center pawns to white's 1. White can try to prove that they have some play down the d file, but black has a good piece formation, good activity. Okay, so that seems to be one of the more critical variations, the c5 move. Again, taking advantage of the fact that without the queen on d1, d5 could be a little shakier for white. Even though black can't take the pawn right away, this bishop b7 switchback. What happens if white plays e4 and defends? Queen e7 is a good answer. Probably creating multiple threats. Okay. Yeah, good to know. I'm just not too familiar with the theory in this line. So black played bishop e7, and bishop g2 was my response. Looks like e4 is also approved by the engine. Yeah, this looked a little familiar. It looks like there are games in the database. So this variation, something along these lines. I'm almost positive I've seen or even played before. Have I wandered into this before? Something like this in king g2. I don't know. But this looked somewhat simplistic for black to play. I think white has a nice position, but for whatever reason, I just didn't want to find out if this was some theory. I just felt like playing something a little more flexible. So bishop g2 castles. Yeah, I wasn't interested in playing knight e5 and attacking the rook on a8. I always thought d6 or d5 would be a fine answer. So we're just taking our time. Still following many games in the Lichess database. Over 1,000 games here still. A few games in the Masters database. Yeah, so this is the same position as in my prep, but with the queen on c2 versus d1. And actually, just going purely by the Stockfish analysis, that tracks with what I mentioned in the game. I think I said something, maybe this increases my advantage by a couple tenths of a pawn, but I don't know. It's not going to sink black's position or something. And that seems to be the case. This is a more generous advantage for white than the other lines I was prepping with the queen on d1, but it's not decisive yet. Nice, but surely not decisive. So d5, yeah. d5 is one of those moves that looks consistent. Take, e-pawn take. So if black had taken with the knight, I think I would have been happy to do this. And if bishop takes e4, that's an accelerated version of another one of those lines I was prepping. Because in one of those lines, I was playing queen c2 first to prepare e4. It was actually black to move in this position, remember, and we were looking at knight d7, for example. e4, bishop b7, rook d1, rook c8, and I was looking at d5. So, yeah, it looks like this would have been nice for me. Something along these lines. Yeah, this is pretty much the dream setup for white in this line. Easy play, 2 pawns in the center. Black's a little cramped. Getting in c5 is going to be challenging when they run into issues on the d file. Black's got some work to do here. So black took with the pawn. That makes sense. Bishop f4. Yeah, what if knight h5? Bishop d2. We could have a little shimmy back and forth. There's sometimes a dance like that between the dark square bishop and one of black's knights. But knight bd7. I played rook fd1. Same move played in the Masters database a couple times. Not the only move, though. It's hard to know. It does actually give rook a d1 a very slight nod, though it's hard to say how much we should look into the differences here. Knight e5 as well. Yeah, all these moves are valid. I mean, later, it kind of seemed like rook a d1 would be helpful. Could have used the defensive f2 and the rook being around my king, but it's so hypothetical what actually ended up happening in the game, so there's no way to know. I played rook fd1 because it seems like the other rook wants to go to c1. That's the standard thing to do. So, yeah, c6, and that takes us out of the Masters database. There's a couple games with rook c8 and knight e4. Knight e4 looks like this is nice for white, and there's also bishop takes c7, but looks like this is nice. So I kind of like the move that Banana Monkey played, c6. At first, it seemed very passive in the game, but it makes a lot of sense. I think if you're not going to go for c5 and you're not willing to play this type of position where, as I was explaining in the game, black could easily wind up in a tough situation if they can't defend d5. I think if you're not going to go for that, looks like it likes this as well. Playing c6 and just saying, I'm going to play solid and reinforce d5 or the b5 square. It's a pretty good game plan. a4 is one of my best responses here. That's a weird engine move. Looks like a4, a5 would benefit black, but maybe it likes that on the king side for some reason. I did think about knight e5. It just seems a little premature. So bishop h3, yeah, rook e8. And now knight e5. Okay, and black took. Knight f8 is another move. I didn't think about knight f8 at all. But that's a good point that the engine makes. They could play around this outposted knight. And maybe bring this knight to g6 someday, or possibly play the other knight back. It's a bit sophisticated. Borrowing an idea from the Queen's Gambit declined once again. But black took, and this felt critical because I thought on bishop takes, just bishop d6. Black doesn't seem like they have any problems. So I'm playing in the center. I'm trying to create issues somewhere. Take, pawn takes, knight h5. And here's where I used all this time and made a big misjudgment. e6, yeah. And black is better now. And moreover, Banana Monkey played it the right way. So bishop e3, queen d3, bishop c1, all rated as better, but not hugely so. Yeah, bishop e3. Well, mention this move. It hinders d4. There's issues with black's knight, so g6 makes sense. I don't know. I just wasn't seeing a whole lot of potential here with my e-pawn blocked. A bit of a strange position. Both sides have to spend some time unwinding. I guess if black goes c5, do they run into issues with... Oh, rook takes d5. Wow. I thought knight takes d5 maybe, but rook takes d5 and then rook d1. Wow. Try to get the knight in. And if black wants two rooks for the queen, it likes white here. Quite a bit, actually. Interesting. Probably because I have momentum with these pawns in the center eventually. Wow. Yeah, so I believe it when the engine says knight h5 should be met by a bishop retreat or some other move than e6, because e6 is the forceful move, but it was based on a misjudgment that I was winning a pawn if black took on f4. So I'm still struggling to come up with a reason why I misjudged it that way. What about the line I was looking at? So if pawn takes e6, bishop takes, king h8, is knight takes d5 good? Yeah, knight takes d5 is good. Look at that. Not bishop f7. This is the move that I had bad vibes about. Yeah. Good. Okay, I'm at least happy that my evaluation of this just seems scary. I'm up a point of material here, in fact, but my king is open. Even coming to the G file is long-term scary against this bishop. I don't have much pawn play to speak of. So seems like I evaluated a lot of the lines correctly after e6 pawn takes. This would have been beautiful. Bishop c7, yeah, rook c8, because again, the queen is trapped, and his rook ace, yeah, rook ace c1 is good. And white is better here in the end. Okay, so I'm smiling because I'm happy I evaluated that correctly. I wasn't looking at knight f6 or bishop f6. I was mostly looking at this, but even with these moves, that seems to be the correct conclusion. Bishop takes d8, rook c7. So bishop takes is preferred, and then bishop c8 at the end. Yeah, and even, I think I mentioned, some positions like this where it's a rook and a pawn against two minor pieces, it's not inconceivable that the rook and the pawn can be better with better coordination. Black's pieces don't quite work together so well, especially if the white rook gets to the 8th rank. So that doesn't shock me that white is better here. So a case of long analysis, wrong analysis. I spent all this time and energy getting this variation to work. This beautiful knight takes d5, which was somewhat reimbursed later because I did land knight takes d5 in a different situation. But yeah, black responded with knight takes f4, dared me to take on f7. And I thought for the longest time that this left me up a pawn, but that was certainly not the case. And black would be doing well if this happened. Yeah, here, bishop c5, pressure on the f2 pawn. Not shocking that black's slightly better now, messing up my king side a bit and gaining the bishop pair. So is bishop c8 a big mistake? Yeah, bishop c8. So again, I'm trying to take away some positives for me. I'm not even trying to. It's nice to see that my analysis in game was accurate, even though I was making some misjudgments. Some of the big turning points, from what I'm seeing so far in my analysis, I judged correctly that this bishop g2 switchback was a big momentum changer. So yeah, black was relying on some tactical ideas to prevent queen takes h7, but was it simpler just to play king g8? Yeah, that's one move. There's also bishop d6 even. It's a little more sophisticated. Is the idea you can take on f4. Yeah, and if check, you have queen f6. I guess everything works out. Queen d7, rook e7. Okay, so bishop d6 is also good. I thought I looked at something with bishop d6. Maybe not, though. Maybe I didn't look at... Maybe I did look at this line, or maybe only rook h8. I think I mentioned this move. Looks like that was okay. Queen d6, that's a tougher move, I would say. But I think for all intents and purposes, king g8 was the move. Just go and hide. And yeah, maybe I would have done this, trying for something like this, and I saw I always had a perpetual, but maybe there's an attack of some sort too against the king. But even if black plays h6 here, okay, the engine finds some way I can maybe engineer some problems, but it didn't seem so convincing to me in the game. Looks like this is also good too. Takes. And bishop d6, probably with counterplay coming. Interesting. Queen h4. What if here, check, my king is exposed? There's bishop a6 ideas that can crop up. Interesting. Won't go too far down that rabbit hole, but yeah, I think king g8 was just the move. Safeguard the king. And if you got to hide in the corner or even play h6, probably that's not a big deal. But I understand the desire to play bishop c8. If we look at this from Banana Monkey's point of view, this bishop has been buried for the past several moves. In playing c6, he probably counted on playing bishop c8 or bishop a6 somewhere. So the timing of it just didn't happen to be so great because of this bishop g2 move. Probably my best move in the game. Bishop g2. And again, I can't grab here on h7. That runs into rook h8 when I don't have a good check to give. Queen takes c8 I briefly looked at. Or bishop takes c8, I should say. I thought after queen takes c8, queen takes h7, black would have good counterplay with some combo of these moves. Yeah, it looks like that's the case. Rook h8. Honestly, even taking on f4 probably leaves black somewhat better. But yeah, this definitely didn't feel right. So I see the tactical justification for this, but bishop g2 just happens to be very strong. And all of a sudden, black misses their bishop on that diagonal that it was just on. And queen takes h7 is back on the agenda, and so is knight takes d5, especially knight takes d5. So the best chance for black is to put the bishop right back on b7 and give the pawn, but make sure this d5 square is firmly reinforced. Yeah, it's a tough move to play psychologically. Even in the abstract, it looks very passive. It's hard to tear yourself away from guarding f5 and not worrying about h7. I don't even know if I was thinking about bishop back to b7. Also allows me to play e4 if I want. Yeah. I understand black's dilemma at this point. Bishop g2 is just hard to come back from. Because knight takes d5 opens everything up. What if bishop e6? Is f5 good against that? Yeah, f5, kick the bishop. And even here, knight takes d5. Yeah, there's lots of iterations of this where I can take, and there might be a loose piece down the d file at the end as well. So rook b8 was played, and I had another long think here, and then played knight takes d5. You guys can't quite see the time, but went from 11 down to about 7 with that move. Yeah. And I think if black takes, I was still semi-hallucinating, thinking, oh, does black get 2 pieces for the queen? A rook and 2 pieces for the queen? But no. We cancel the rooks. It's just queen versus rook and bishop, and I've got extra pawns. 2 extra pawns, so that's not even close. And I thought if king f8, queen takes h7 was crushing. Looks like the only move to avoid mate here is queen takes d5. But for example, if bishop f6, queen g8, king f7, I didn't look too much further in these lines. I just saw that any bishop move is skewering and winning the queen, and black can't even escape on the 7th rank. Surely they're getting mated here very quickly. Yeah. King f6 also. King f6, I just checked to make sure that I could check them and then force them onto a light square in the simplest version. Go win the queen. So look at sacrifices of a minor piece or a rook even for a couple pawns. If those pawns are the key to defending your opponent's position, a sacrifice like knight takes d5 might very well work, especially if you laid the groundwork. All this stuff works because my rook is opposite black's queen, very importantly. So that's the theme, the type of theme that comes into play way back when we play rook fd1. And I mentioned it at the time, and any strong player knows this. Despite this file looking clogged, lining weaker pieces, especially rooks, long-range pieces like that, bishops sometimes too, with higher value enemy pieces can pay dividends later when the game opens up. It's remarkable how often that happens. And that's the whole reason all these themes with knight takes d5 work, because I've got that rook lurking behind. Okay, so knight takes d5. Okay, nice. b4, yeah, one of my better moves of the game too. This felt like the right move. I don't want to try to wave my hands too much and do the master thing where you just say this looks right, or shortcut for trust me. But this bishop's annoying, no doubt. It's pressuring the f pawn. It's blocking my queen's influence down the file. It's shaky though at the same time. I'm happy to see b4 is the right move. So I think that was some good judgment on my part. Calculation, but mostly judgment. I'm playing with house money here because I'm up a pawn. So I don't think there's too much risk in playing this move. I'm just trusting that stuff like this or bishop takes d5 first is inevitably going to work out for me. And the big calculation was just making sure what happened in the game. So if black takes here, this I think is still very strong. But the big calculation is just making sure what happened in the game is good for me. Yeah, I was debating king f1 versus king g1. Looks like king g1 is better. King f1 just slightly rubbed me the wrong way because I was seeing some issues with bishop h3 in some lines where black can try to take my bishop with check. And also maybe queen takes f4 coming with check. But it looks like if this happens, if black takes the knight, none of that really matters. Yeah, and that tracks. But I don't know. In my head, something like this looked less clear than the game. Okay, and it looks like rook d2 is my only truly convincing move here. That's a tough move. So I'm kind of glad rook d2 to maybe create some escape route for the king if black starts checking like this. My queen always defends f4. So if black starts checking this way, I can start scooting the king over. That's tricky. I don't know that I would have found rook d2. So here too, I'm calculating, but I'm using some judgment. King g1, the trade-off was I weakened e2, but my king felt safer here, not only against queen takes f4 stuff, but the bishop h3 stuff later. So I was willing to let black have rook takes e2 in some of these lines that we'll look at in a second, because I just felt like my king being on g1 was worth it. So yeah, I criticized Banana Monkey here for playing bishop d7, despite the engine saying that's best apparently. Yeah, no other real good moves. I mean, the computer's saying bishop g4 to attack this, but this must be winning pretty easily for white. Okay, black might have some short-term play. They have more pieces around my king, but as long as I'm not allowing queen f2, you can see how the bishop helps defend my king. This is over. What about bishop h3? Maybe bishop h3, queen b3 in some circumstance. Bishop takes, queen takes, rook d3. Okay, that's a slightly more difficult line. Point there is if queen g4, there's rook g3. Yeah, you can kind of see as soon as I get one major piece around my king to help out in the defense, all this compensation that black might be looking for just melts away and black's busted. It's kind of like that game against Terror MT where there was this late, not even late, but there was this scary looking play against my king in the later stages of the game. But if I include some of my pieces tactically in the defense, even from afar, it's never really working out. The extra material carries the day. But there is I will say there is a fine line between that. It's not like we can just blindly hope that that theme is going to stick. No, I have to calculate this stuff too. Queen c7 takes. But the thing I was a little less crazy about having to prove was in this line. So if rook e7, and I know the engine already says +5, +6, whatever, black has to go for this to have any chance. Threaten queen f2, threaten rook takes g2. Now is queen c7? Yeah, queen c7 is one of the best moves here. And I was just thinking, black can't really afford to pull back at this point. And bishop d7 just allows me to take another piece with check. So it looked awkward for them because they got to go to either the 6th rank or the 8th rank. And if they go to the 8th rank, well, I can pick up this bishop with check and the party continues. Now I see I even have queen h3 next in some case like this where queen f2 can be rendered moot. So that really only leaves the king coming up. Like let's say king f6, but that's going to have problems too, like queen d8. Yeah, skewer. And if rook e7 is the only way to save it, that's game over. King g6 is probably the most dangerous looking move, but I think there probably queen d6. I'm trying to calculate it myself without looking at the engine. Yeah, queen d6. Or, you know, another thing I saw in a lot of lines, f5. That's probably a good move too, which enables my queen to come back to g3. So you see consistently how this queen can often make her way back in the defense. Something like this. Even force a queen trade in the process. I saw some line like that in the game. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I did see something like that in the game. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's not a mistake that's going to affect the results of the game probably, but it's a practical mistake for black to play bishop d7 because you got to go for the scarier looking thing in a position where you're already down so much material where it doesn't matter if you're down a bishop and a pawn versus being down a rook. You'd rather be down the rook, but have some scary threats towards your opponent's king. Yeah, because now we take everything with check, bring the queen back. Black gets one pawn. I probably dilly-dallied a little bit too much here, you know, hemming and hawing about rook d2 versus rook d8. I mean, any of these lines are winning. Like this was one of the lines I looked at. I think I looked at bishop f1 here as well. Idea of this. All this stuff is winning. But I think the way that I ultimately handled it in the game was kind of nice. It worked out nice. It was a thematic little idea at the end. Yeah. Just hard for black to keep both rooks on the board and create meaningful threats. I think I mentioned lines like rook e8, king f2, just a good move to come up and consolidate. And if g5, some last ditch attempt to create some pressure there. A move like this is always going to decide. Go after b6 and h6. It's too much. Yeah, and we saw in the end there was a nice little theme of entrapping the enemy king. And how you can think schematically too, like I said. So we can more or less ignore black's moves because their rook is stuck to the back rank. Even if they get a check or two in, they're going to have to scamper back to guard against rook e8 checkmate. The king is absolutely not escaping against this configuration. Yeah, they can play the pawn moves forward. We just need to be vigilant of stalemates. But black always has king g8. Yeah, engine's already finding mate in these situations. Yeah, not too important, the details. All this is winning. Okay, so I feel pretty decent about how I handled this game, honestly. Better than I expected before I clicked on the analysis. I knew or had a strong feeling that the engine was not going to like e6 in hindsight because of what happened after knight takes f4. It did feel like black was getting the upper hand at this point when I made that misjudgment of just not being up a pawn. But it turned around in a hurry when black made that mistake, bishop c8, and I got this switchback. That was, I think, bishop g2 and b4 later. Those were my favorite moves of the game. And I have all the momentum after those moves. So, yeah, I think my visualization needs work. I mean, even later, you guys could see I was confused for a second, just judging some of these situations where black gives up the queen. I don't know where it was, but yeah, I mean, even in the game lines, variations like this, where bishop e6 is played, for some reason, maybe because of my misjudgments earlier, in the first 30 seconds of looking at this line, I thought, oh, black has a rook and two pieces. I don't know what two pieces it would be, like a rook and two bishops. I'm hallucinating another bishop for black or the queen. And yeah, I've got the queen and a couple pawns, black's king's open, but maybe that's unclear. So I think that's a symptom of me not being very active with serious over-the-board play and training. Maybe getting a little older too. Again, I don't want to put limits on myself. I know I can play very strong when I'm hitting on all cylinders, but that little bit of rust, that'll get me in trouble against strong players. Players are on my own rating, higher, even like young, motivated NMs, FMs, like I faced in Title Tuesday when I used to play Title Tuesday a lot. That gets you in trouble against those players. So that's a tendency I'm going to monitor throughout this Lone Wolf season and try to work on my visualization. Calculation goes hand in hand with visualization. And my friend Aiden from the website Don't Move Until You See It, which is a great website where you can practice visualization, he would actually call this stuff conceptualization. A little more of a comprehensive term, but I'll call it visualization. That is one of the elements that goes when you're not training chess as seriously as you might have been in other periods of your life. Just your ability to see where the pieces are on the board when you're calculating multi-move sequences. You kind of forget, you hallucinate pieces in places where they aren't. You make misjudgments. Didn't hurt me too much here. I think I capped the damage at about a half pawn. If we go by this evaluation, this dropped from a sliver of an advantage for me, plus 0.2, down to about a half pawn advantage for black, maybe more after this. Also likes queen f5 and taking with the queen, by the way, keeping the structure together. I didn't play that because I didn't want to encourage black to go towards the corner with their king. But I can see why the engine thinks that's the better course for me. Try to keep the structure intact. But yeah, all this to say, if you notice your visualization, conceptualization slipping a little bit, and you haven't been studying a whole lot of chess, don't take that as a surprise. Your opening theory might still be good. Your calculation might even be still normal, but you might not actually be seeing the position in your mind's eye as well as you once were when you were more active. So, all right. Thank you very much, Banana Monkey, for this game. Hope Banana Monkey enjoyed it, and maybe we'll pop in the chat for some comments. Again, also to my opponents and anyone who thinks maybe I'm being a little hard on players at certain points, I know most of you are going to give me the benefit of the doubt about that stuff. I'm not at all criticizing anyone personally or their chess, of course, but I'm trying to treat these games and the advice I would give myself and my opponents, whether they care to take it or not, it doesn't matter. The things that I would want to hear in their shoes if I were analyzing with a coach or a stronger player. And honestly, I might play a game in this season where I want to know what my opponent was thinking. And maybe there's some gap in my knowledge that's revealed itself, and I would want them to be honest with me. You always want people to be honest with you in life and in chess, especially. That's how we get better. So some of these things, even the not putting your name maybe in the Lee Chess profile. If this opponent, they've done the calculation, they said, oh, I don't mind that. That's fine. It's good to be social and stuff. But even just picking something like that up and say, hey, it was easy to find your games in the database because I saw your Lee Chess profile. That's something that might help any of us in a tournament. So it's all for improvement, guys. All right. So thanks again, Banana Monkey, for the game. Thanks to the spectators. Thanks to all of you for watching this, especially if you stuck around for the analysis and the preparation. 3-0. We'll see what next week brings. I'm really enjoying this league, but it's only going to get harder from here. So stay tuned. Another video coming soon. Okay, let me know what you guys think. Thanks again for watching. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you guys next week for Lone Wolf. Bye, guys.